Neighbors mocked the old woman's overgrown garden. Spring changed every mind. Grady Holt stood at the edge of the fence line and said, "This whole block's property values are dropping because you won't mow that jungle back there." Odessa Marsh stood among her tangled rows, dirt under her fingernails, one hand resting on a cluster of unmarked green stalks, pushing up through last year's mulch. Behind her, two neighbors walking their dogs slowed to watch. This wasn't the end of anything. This was the moment right before that overgrown garden turned the whole street's opinion of Odessa Marsh completely inside out, and nobody standing at that fence knew it yet. A voice cut in, quick and unbothered, the kind that talks over the cold open before it's earned the silence. "They're out here mocking an 80-year-old woman's garden. This one's about to get good." Odessa had lived in that house for over 50 years, in a neighborhood that had changed hands and faces a dozen times around her, and her own mother, Corinne Marsh, used to walk her through the rows when she was a girl, and say the same thing every planting season. "Baby, a garden that looks like nothing is usually just getting started. Anybody in a hurry will pull it up before it ever gets the chance to prove them wrong." Odessa believed her. What nobody on that block knew, not Grady, not the neighbors who complained to the Homeowners Association, was that Odessa had spent 40 years quietly working as a certified seed conservator through a regional agricultural extension program, preserving heirloom varieties that had gone extinct everywhere else, planting them exactly the way her mother had taught her, in patterns that looked wild to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. She kept her certification papers in a tin box on the back porch. A woman kneeling in an overgrown yard draws less attention than one who's quietly kept a vanished strain of seed alive for half a century. The first rung came the next week. Grady stood at the Homeowners Association meeting and said, loud enough for the whole room, "We've got one yard dragging down every property value on the street, and she won't even explain what she's growing back there." A few neighbors nodded along. The second rung came 3 days later. Grady had the association mail Odessa a formal violation notice, citing excessive vegetation and threatening a lien on her house if the yard wasn't cleared within 30 days. The third rung came the following week. Grady hired a landscaping crew and had them idle their trucks at the curb in front of Odessa's house for 2 full days, a visible threat, while she stood on her porch watching men she didn't know eye her garden with clippers in hand. The fourth rung came on a Saturday morning. Several neighbors gathered on the sidewalk to watch. Grady walked into Odessa's yard himself, without permission, and began pulling stalks up by the handful, saying, "This ends today. I'm done waiting on paperwork." Dirt and torn roots scattering across the grass. Off to the side, a neighbor named Curtis Odom stood on his own porch, watching the whole thing, saying nothing out loud, his phone propped against his porch railing, recording low and steady. Odessa didn't raise her voice. She walked out onto the grass, knelt down beside the torn plants, and gathered what she could save into her apron, hands steady the whole time. A voice broke in again, sharper this time, refusing to let the moment pass quiet. The man just walked onto an 80-year-old woman's property and started ripping plants out of the ground with his bare hands. Somebody explain that to me. That same afternoon, Odessa's neighbor called the County Agricultural Extension Office on her behalf, and the case reached Denise Okafor, the region's heirloom seed preservation officer, who had spent years trying to track down a lost strain of native bean, documented in old county records but never located. Denise drove out that evening, asking first to see whatever remained of the garden. Grady came around his truck smiling the smile he used for anyone with a clipboard, and said the yard was simply an eyesore, a code violation, nothing more. Officer Okafor didn't raise her voice. She asked one question: "Where is the gardener who's been growing this?" Curtis Odom stepped forward from his porch, phone already in hand, and played the footage. Grady's own voice from the front yard, unmistakable, tearing up plants by hand and declaring he was done waiting on paperwork, time-stamped the moment it happened. Grady's smile didn't move for a second longer than it should have. Officer Okafor knelt beside the torn rows, examined what was left and said, "These are a documented heirloom variety, believed extinct in this county for 30 years. You just destroyed part of the only surviving planting of it in the state." By Thursday, the county had opened a formal investigation into the unauthorized destruction of a documented conservation planting, and Grady was barred from any further contact with Odessa's property pending that review. The Homeowners Association board member who had pushed the violation notice through, without an agricultural review, was quietly removed from the board within the month. Grady was made to stand at that same fence line, in front of Officer Okafor, Curtis, and a small group of neighbors, and say, "I'm sorry if I acted too quickly." It was the kind of apology that apologized to no one at all. Odessa, asked if she had anything to add, looked at him, and said only, "You didn't clear a yard, you just made the county come see what was actually growing in it," and knelt back down to press the saved roots gently back into the soil. The following spring, Odessa's garden bloomed fuller than it had in years, the salvaged rows replanted and thriving under a small protective marker the county extension office had installed, identifying it as a certified heirloom conservation site. The restoration grant awarded for the damage didn't go to Odessa alone. By her own request, part of it was redirected into a neighborhood seed-sharing program, so other families on the block could learn to grow what she'd protected for so long. Corinne Marsh's photograph sat on Odessa's porch table the morning the marker was installed, and neighbors who'd once complained now stood at the fence asking questions instead of making them. A voice closed it out, warm now, no longer sharp. "Look, this one's fiction, all of it, made up front to back, but you know how many real gardens, real traditions, get called an eyesore by somebody who never bothered to ask what they were looking at. So here's the actual question. If that garden was next door to you, would you have asked what she was growing, or complained like everybody else on that block did? Tell me in the comments. Like this if you'd have asked first. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because this isn't the last story we're telling.